Hey everyone, and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. Today we are going to be covering Azerite gear on the Battle for Azeroth Alpha. It's had an interesting rollout, with Blizzard unfortunately not giving testers the needed context, such that it looks like a pretty bare system. Now thankfully I've had the opportunity at a press event to ask the developers a few questions on this topic. The embargo's lifted, so I can share some of just, Ian's thoughts and a little bit that I got from a Q&A, and that should give you a more complete picture of what the team intends. That said, I do think there are a few flaws with the current design, and we're going to cover those once I've explained what's going on the alpha. So today's Battle for Azeroth build has a single piece of Azerite gear that appears to be leveling gear. Why do I think it's leveling gear? Well, if you look at how many points that are required to unlock each new unlock tier of the traits, it's really small, easily enough to cover while you're leveling. This means that in terms of overall design, this one bit of Azerite gear is competing with an artifact weapon that only has its first few traits unlocked. Also, you've got to remember that you'll be wearing Azerite gear in 3 slots, so this, design-wise, is the equivalent to 1/3 of the space that an artifact weapon would actually take up. Now, the first set of traits gives you a tangible change to how your spec plays by modifying your abilities, and the intent here is that you'll be able to customize your playstyle a little bit more, and you'll be able to have 3 bits of gear so that that can sort of allow you to mix and match and combine different gameplay choices, essentially just to get a lot more customization over how your class plays in comparison to Legion. Currently there are 4 traits. One of them is just a generic one that's useful to everyone. The others, though, are far more specific, so I think the Warrior is a great example. One of the options is for arms. It causes Execute to increase the damage of your next mortal strike, so it's pretty much baking, I believe, an artifact trait into the Azerite gear. The next option is for Fury, and that causes you to get a versatility buff every time you rampage an enemy with a lower percentage health than you, which is a bit convoluted, but I kind of get the gameplay implication there. Then for Protection, it causes single target thunderclaps to hit a little bit harder and give you an absorb shield. After this, we then see 2 tiers that are a bit less impactful to your rotation, and then finally, the last tier just gives you a +5 item level increase to the gear. So let's just work through what all of this means. Blizzard's intent here is that the major gameplay affecting stuff is on the first row, which means that you get access to it pretty quickly, and really that's the bit of the gear that you care about. It's the stuff that impacts the gameplay. It allows you to build your character's playstyle. The other tiers are certainly a lot less interesting. They're just sort of a bit of raw progression, really, though some of them do seem quite nice. For an example, getting heal and a speed boost after killing an enemy, yeah, that seems pretty good. Now, you won't be dealing with just 1 bit of gear, of course. You're going to have 3, so this is going to allow for quite a lot of customization early on. But that said, there are some pretty major problems in my view. Currently, there is no way to respec them. This is a bit mind-boggling to me. It seems perfectly reasonable to want to respec the build of 1 bit of Azerite gear to better synergize with another drop. Perhaps the greater issue here as well is that the first tier is 1 trait for every spec. That means that you don't have much choice, and when it's combined with the fact that you currently cannot respec, it means that multi-specking is kind of challenging and weird. Now, I guess that it is true that, previously there were, say, tank, healer, and DPS legendaries in Legion, but I don't think that we should have to go around with a bag full of Azerite gear that we need to swap around. I suppose to me it feels a little bit at odds with the goal of the system. I think it's supposed to be about class customization, almost like an extension of your talents. Having those be locked so much feels maybe a little bit too much. A bit like how having 3 separate bits of tier for every spec in Legion would have felt really strange. Now, I really think that they should just let players swap between the Azerite traits pretty much at will. I'm not sure how I feel about there being 1 trait per spec either. Even if you could respec, it does mean that it's less about playing around with your combinations from a bit of Azerite gear, and it's more about just collecting loads of Azerite gear and then swapping in and out the actual bits of Azerite gear. I suppose I understand it would be, perhaps a bit much having, say, 4 talent trees for every spec on every bit of Azerite gear, but currently it does seem a bit limited. That said, we've yet to see endgame Azerite gear, and we don't know if it'll break the pattern that we see here. I do like how the impactful portion of the Azerite gear is pretty much on the first set of traits. This shifts the core reward away from grinding your Heart of Azeroth, and it makes it's emphasizing the exciting part, which is getting a new bit of gear and then customizing how your class plays. I think that's a pretty strong core pillar for this system to exist on top of. Now, as I mentioned, a bit of gear maxing out at 10 points means that it's very early, almost certainly leveling gear. And well, the way that Azerite gear works is that essentially the better quality gear will have a higher Heart of Azeroth level requirement to unlock the traits. So from what I understand, this means that as you progress through more and more difficult content, the Heart of Azeroth requirements for the traits go up, which means that the leveling process for your Heart of Azerite should stay meaningful for longer than the core first 36 traits of your artifact weapon back in Legion. And from what I understand, there is also going to be an artifact knowledge-like catch-up system, but we don't have the details for that yet. And one pretty cool thing that I was able to get actually from my Q&A is that Azerite traits can be themed around the gear.
So there's multiple rings on the Azerite powers, and so each ring is a different power level, and I think the numbers that's still something we're tuning. That's going on live on alpha today, so we'll know more about the like what works and what doesn't, and whether those powers feel appealing. What we look at, so we have the first ring is spec specific powers, and then there's one generic power that is like custom to the item that it's coming from, or the source of the item where it's coming from. So what you'll see on alpha is a piece from Drustvar that has Drustvar specific ability on it. That power will actually be different based off of where you get it from. So we'll see different powers in dungeons, we'll see different powers in raids, we'll see different powers in PvP content. Maybe there's an engineering piece out there that exists too that has different powers on it that only engineers can build. That might happen. So I think it's something we'll see.
I think that's pretty cool, especially if you go into, say, having traits that are themed around the raid in which you get the gear. I think that's just a nice sort of fantasy. So that's pretty much the lowdown on Azerite gear. I think there's a knee-jerk worry that's really understandable here. The bit of Azerite gear that they threw in the PTR was really without context. And I think the situation is a lot better knowing that this is likely very early leveling gear, but there do seem to be some potential issues that could carry forward into the endgame. I think Blizzard's stated design goals with the Azerite gear really mesh well with me, having the power of legendaries, tier sets, and artifacts, but in a way where you get to do a lot of customization yourself. I think that's great. Of course, the question is whether the system itself will meet that goal. We definitely just have to wait and see, but I hope this video at least gave you a bit more perspective on the overall system and what's currently on the alpha. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.